Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be teaching you about the brain and its anatomy and all of its different pieces, what they're called, their functions, and where they're located in the brain. I already sketched out, I'm a very visual learner, so I wanted to show you a map of the brain. I already sketched it out in pencil, but as we're going I'll make it darker so you guys can see as we go section by section. So first we're just going to draw out the brain, and it is not going to be perfect. It's going to be a good old time. And we're going to start with the outside of the brain, which I have right here, and then we'll do the inside brain right here afterwards. The brain is a complex organ. It has a lot of functions to it, and once I'm done doing this guy out, I will help you with that. So first, very basic, I'm gonna tell you what the cerebrum is. And that is the name for the soft jelly-like mass that is the brain. That's what all of this is. It's really squishy, and it is, it's full of all the neurons and the nerves that have the constant firing back and forth that make all the different pieces of the brain work. And so this whole section out here, and the basic name of the mass that is the brain is the cerebrum. Next we're going to do the frontal lobe, which is the very front of the brain, where this is going to be the front of the brain, this is the back of the brain. Eyeballs are right here. The frontal lobe is behind the forehead, behind the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe work together. They are the slowest part of the brain to develop, and that's why a lot of the time they take about partially through your adulthood life to completely mature and come together, and it's part of the high risk behavior. So that's why they say a lot of the time in teenagers why they act out so much, why they have some risky behavior. But the main part of the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe is planning and thinking. It's the high order thinking. There's a little bit of personality involved in there. But most of your good old thinking happens right there. So we're gonna label him right here with the frontal lobe. Draw a little arrow so you don't get confused. And the prefrontal cortex. Next, we're going to do the temporal lobes. And if you know anywhere on your brain, right above your ears, if you touch that area of your brain, that let's say your ear is right here, this is your temporal lobe. We're going to color him blue. And the temporal lobe has to deal with sound, music, face recognition, and speech. But the speech is only on the left side. I always like to remember this one because of the sound and the music and face recognition. Mostly for sound and music, I think of it right above my ears. I can't hear those things without my ears. And so right above my ear is my temporal lobe. Temporal lobe. There he is. Actually, I think this guy comes a little farther back than how I drew. I like drawing out my diagrams because it's easier to understand for me, and if I'm teaching it to other people, I feel like that's easier to understand too. Next, we're going to do the occipital lobes, which is the very back. I always like to remember this as occipital means the eyes, because like if you think of going and getting your eyes checked, I always like to remember it as the eyes in the back of your head. So that's how you remember where the occipital lobe is. and that's its function, is visual functions. And it's all the visual processing, so like how you recognize color and shape. Let's label him occipital lobe. Oop, forgot a letter. There we go. And then we're gonna do the parietal lobe, which is just above the occipital lobe. It'll be right here. It's actually a very big section, but I'm gonna cut it off here because we're labeling something else here. And I don't wanna mess you up. So this is the parietal lobe. Oh, my marker, there we go. And the function of the parietal lobe is sensory information. So this is where if you're feeling pain in your fingertips, this is the part of the brain that tells you you are feeling pain in your fingertips. Or if something feels warm on your back, this is also part of the brain that tells you where your feeling senses in your body. It's how your brain processes those. So we're gonna label this parietal lobe. P-A-R-I-E-T-A-L, lobe. Okay, next are two bands that run from one ear all the way over to the other ear. And they are the different cortexes. The front one is the motor cortex. And so let's say the frontal lobe goes farther back and the parietal lobe goes back, and these cortexes go over. This one is the motor cortex. This is basic body movement. And it works hand in hand with the cerebellum that is all the firing neurons of the brain. It is very basic about your body movement and how your hands work. So I always remember this one by, since it's a motor cortex, your motor skills with your hands and your feet. And then let's do the band right behind it, which is the somatosensory cortex. This one's always hard to say. Somatosensory. And if I'm saying it wrong, sorry. And that one is right behind the motor cortex. Its function is, and it works with the parietal lobe. It takes your touch signals and your sense signals from different parts of your body, and it sends those out. So I'm gonna actually write this one in it because it's a long word. Somatosensory, oh, there's a Y, cortex. That one works hand in hand with the parietal lobe, with the senses and figuring out where in your body you're feeling something. Next, we're gonna do the brainstem. We're gonna color the brainstem purple. And it's right here. And this houses the RAS system, which is the reticular active, I always say this wrong, the one more time, reticular activatory system. And this is all about alertness and your vital body functions. So your heartbeat, your respiration, your body temperature, your digestion, everything that keeps your body working and functioning is in your brainstem. I remember this by, if you think of a headless chicken or headless cockroach or anything that is headless and keeps going, is because the brainstem is still functioning after they get their head chopped off, because the brainstem goes all the way down into the spine. And that is what keeps the basic body functions going. All right, so next is the cerebellum, and this is called the little brain. It also has two hemispheres, just like the regular brain does. and it's located right on the back of your neck. So if you were to interlock your fingers and put them behind your head, kind of right above your neck, that's what you would be touching, technically. And so this has to do with a lot of movement as well. So like performance and timing of complex motor skills. So like if you're doing a sport and you're going to go kick the ball or go catch the ball, or if you're dancing and you know that one foot goes after the other in a certain way, that is the complex motor skills that the cerebellum works with. It also has a little bit of memory in there, but the memory is of movements. So if you have learned to ride your bike, and you haven't done it in a long time, and then you get back on your bike, you still remember, and that's what is stored there in the cerebellum. And this is the outside of the brain. And now we're gonna move to the inside of the brain. So we still have all the cerebrum around here. We're mostly gonna be focusing right here. So as I do that, I'm gonna just draw it out in Sharpie so you can see it a little easier. The middle of the brain is a little more complex to remember. But since I'm a visual learner and a visual teacher, I'm going to show you how I remember things. I'm going to get a little less detailed with this one because I don't want to keep writing all over my paper and have you get a little confused. So the very center of the brain right here is called the limbic system. That's this big old juicy part right here. That is the limbic system. And that is just the general name for this area. It's also called the limbic area. We're gonna focus right here first on this little guy right here. This is the corpus callosum. This is the thick cable that runs back and forth that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. It's called a cable a lot of the time. And it has over 200 million nerve fibers used as a bridge to keep the two different hemispheres of the brain communicating back and forth with each other. This is like, you know how when they say the left side of your brain functions the right side of your body and vice versa? That is true, but it does work hand in hand with the other half of your brain. So this is what helps it do that. I like to think of it as, since it's the corpus callosum, I think of it as a fancy name. This isn't a very good analogy, you guys. A very fancy name for a bridge. Corpus callosum. And if I'm saying these wrong, I'm very sorry, but I am spelling them right. So that works with your brain activity back and forth, making sure they work well together. Next, we're going to do the thalamus. The thalamus is the whole middle area. Thalamus is Greek for inner chamber, so I think of it as just the very middle pocket of the limbic system. Is our thalamus right here. It deals with your senses. It takes all of your senses besides smell, and it goes to the thalamus first and processes them and then sends those feelings of the senses and what it means out to different parts of your brain so you can function. So that is the thalamus, Greek for inner chamber, and it works with your senses. Next is we're going to do the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is considered this lower part right here, but in a lot of diagrams it actually wraps, the main part is right here, but it wraps a little bit around the thalamus. I like to think of it hugging the thalamus. So hypothalamus hugs the thalamus, but it's mostly, the main part is below it. It monitors your internal systems for homeostasis, and homeostasis means your normal state of the body. This controls your hormones, it controls your sleep, your body temperature, everything basic such as your body functions. So your food and liquid intake. And this is kind of your moderating system. So if anything is off in your body, like you're dehydrated or you're not getting enough sleep, the hypothalamus is what knows and what tries to get you back into that perfect functioning state as a together body. Next is the hippocampus. We're going to color him orange. And the hippocampus is this right here. It's Greek for seahorse. And on my not very well drawn diagram, it doesn't look like it, but on most diagrams and in real life, it does look a little bit like a seahorse. It kind of curls up a little bit as well. This is the hippocampus, aka the seahorse. This is the very base of the limbic system. This works as consolidating and converting your learning and information from what you're currently doing, and it takes it from your working memory into your long-term storage. This can take a little while to convert it, but that is the function of the hippocampus. It takes, like for example, what I'm doing is I'm showing you the brain, and as I'm learning it, it's going into the hippocampus and trying to put it in my long-term storage so I can study for the test. Hippocampus. Boop. Next is the amygdala. A lot of people call it the amygdala, which is easy for when you're trying to learn how to spell it, but it's called the amygdala. It's this right here. The amygdala works with your emotions, especially fear. But for your emotions, it is kind of like your fight or flight instincts. So it takes what's most important and what your body is feeling, and it takes those emotions, and that's where it is. And then we're just gonna go over these other items that were in the top brain, which is the same brain. This is the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the cerebrum. And that's the brain. I hope I was able to help you guys study for your test and figure out where all of your brain functions go and the anatomy of the brain and what they all do.